I'm Natasha Tiniacos from Venezuela. I'm a poet. I'm gonna start with the worst thing of being a writer who works and lives in Venezuela, because it's quite famous now that Venezuela has a political and economical crisis that started when Hugo Chavez, who is dead now, came out of the closet as a 21st century socialist. And he controlled all powers of branches of power, and they were supposed to, they were required to pay loyalty to the executive power. And well, we can go to talk, and I can talk about the healthcare system, who is very poor. There's no basic stuff like chicken, coffee, medicines. There's no acetaminophen. There's no basic medicines for all this sickness that is going on right now. It's a virus called chikungunya. It's given to a lot of people, and there's no way to finish that plague. And if we narrow it to the literary part of being a writer, there's no paper to publish books in Venezuela right now. Newspapers are closing down. Journalists are getting fired, not to mention persecuted, but getting fired. And of course, that is censorship. And how is the work of a writer in a country that has no paper to publish books? There's no support from the government whatsoever to import paper and make books. But this takes me to the best thing of being a writer who works and lives there, is that this crisis makes us very mad somehow. Of course, I'm a Chavez opponent, but gives us this energy, this strength to fight just for survival, just to find some coffee for the morning, but also from the small to the universal, to fight for the freedom of speech, to fight for our ideas, that I don't want my poetry to be influenced by a government or by ideas that I don't share. And to that craziness of our daily lives that is so difficult to go on with a simple life, just fighting for a decent life. That energy is also channeled to positive and quest and enterprises. Well, as a country, we have a beautiful weather. We have people who are vibrant, people who likes to enjoy life, fighters. We are fighters, we're survivals. And we have a beautiful landscape, but also very rich, that we can make very productive, talented people. My grandfather was Greek, and all the immigrants that came to Venezuela gave us in our blood this desire to keep on our lives, I don't know, following our dreams, but building something. And we have that. And we also have this sophistication of a Latin American country, that we also look into Europe, we're looking to the United States, we're looking to Asia, to the Middle East, to as a source of influence. We don't stay there. We are, I don't know, that's something very Latin American, and we have it too. I think I react to things, but I like to think them very thoroughly. And the reason why I write is because I consider I have a valid point of view about life. And of course, sometimes I try to detach my work from my anecdotes and my daily life. and I read from Robert Walser. You go to my desk right now in the Iowa House Hotel, and you'll see short stories by Robert Walser. Alice Notley, who poet from this country, Anne Carson, Maureen Carson, Mariana Sveteva, Szymborska. There is a cocktail, but I write like a Latin American woman. I'm concerned about Latin America. I have bad dreams and good dreams about Latin America. And somehow, what drives my writing is to sort of make an echo of that concern and that beauty. Maybe I like to explore aesthetics that go from syntax to semantic elements. And of course, I have this influence of the contemporary American poetry that I am very close to. But my soul, I don't know what the soul is actually, my abstract quest is dealing with Latin American beauties and pain. And it's to make an echo, to make things resonate. And also I have a musical purpose. There's Joan Cage also in my desk. So there's a concern about language. Of course, from Venezuela, I will recommend all the work by Rafael Cadenas. Let's say is our most renowned living poet, but his work is capital to understand from poetry Venezuela. He was also a translator of D.H. Lawrence Walt Whitman, but his body of work is a fantastic window to get to the contemporary Venezuelan poetry. And if one book I recommend very much is an essay by this poet, theorist and philosopher, José Manuel Briceño Guerrero. The name of that book is The Savage Discourse. And I think it's very sophisticated, it's not light reading, but it helps to understand the Chavez phenomenon more in a political sense. But again, Rafael Cadenas, from one to his most recent works. One of the worst things going on right there is the polarization in the conflict. So we have a publishing house with a lot of investment, but it's going to publish just the authors who are loyal to Chavez and the idea of the 21st century socialist. Actually, one of these recent days, Chavez was awarded with a cultural prize, and all these festivals they make, the poetry festival, the book festival, they all have this idea that is a political thing, and they have to pay tribute to their ideas. And of course, the opposition has no money whatsoever, no support from the government. And I think in an ideal situation, the government should support to make sort of like Simone Weil used to say, a counterbalance. Iowa City has given me, for the first time in my life, the complete context of literature. They read literature. Of course, I come in the fall program that everything is condensed, maybe to have the Iowa Book Festival, all these readings by my colleagues and fellow residents. But I go to the street and I know, I look at the sidewalk and there is a literary quote right there, and everything takes me and reminds me, come and work, go to your room and work. Go and grab a coffee, but think something that maybe you can put it in your work, and that's Iowa City. I never experienced that in my life. There's a pleasure and a concern about literature that never stops here. Who are you? Are you a man or a woman? I usually get that question, not from my second book because the title is quite obvious and it's sort of a rite of passage, But the second book, Private Story of an Etc., people think is a man writing those poems, and I found it fantastically because I have this idea, which is might be utopic, an utopia to divorce myself from the poems, and they have their own poetic voice, their own sex or no gender, and I try to make them free. And also once I got this message from a guy on Facebook. I had it on my Facebook friends, and he made a huge list about questions. Why is this poem written backwards? Why is this poem with another font? And I was laughing. I said, this is the best message so far. Everything is on purpose. If you're asking things, you are refreshing your reading or your act of reading, and that is fantastic. I'm gonna start with the worst thing of being a writer who works and lives in Venezuela, because it's quite famous now that Venezuela has a political and economical crisis that started when Hugo Chavez, who is dead now, came out of the closet out of people, and there's no way to finish that plague. And if we narrow it to the literary part of being a writer, there's no paper to publish books in Venezuela right now. Newspapers are closing down. Journalists are getting fired, not to mention persecution. Healthcare system, who is very poor. There's no basic stuff like chicken, coffee, medicines. There's no acetaminophen. There's no basic medicines for all this sickness that is going on right now. It's a virus called chikungunya. It's given to a lot. I'm Natasha Tiniacos from Venezuela. I'm a poet. As a 21st century socialist, and he controlled all powers of branches of power, and they were required to pay loyalty to the executive power. And well, we can go to talk, and I can talk about the